The information about the Columbra citizens being returned spreads like fire in a room soaked with kerosene. Each of the houses scrambles as many vessels as possible to collect their personnel. However, the true motives are very self serving. The first houses to arrive begin to confiscate, steal, and otherwise take anything they can get. They begin taking their own personnel, of course, not above taking others' personnel. Their possessions, their food, even their shelter is being packed up. Nothing is left behind. It doesn't matter whose house they belong to. It is a mad dash to secure as many materials and information as possible. Kind of like the old Black Friday sales from when people went after the Cabbage Patch dolls. The result of this is exactly what you'd expect. A few houses simply wanted to secure their personnel and get the hell out of the line of fire. Everybody else was solely interested in securing so much that they actually created a line of fire. Smaller houses did what they could to escape with their people, but, well, there were issues. Those that arrived late found that their personnel had already been taken by other houses. Due to all this, it isn't long before blood starts to begin to flow as tempers begin to flare. Within 48 hours of them first realizing that their own people were able to be saved, the paradise that the Columbras were experiencing turned into a battlefield. Cookie even got caught up in it. He tried to calm everybody down with food at first, but no one listened, and Cookie found himself being threatened, detained, rescued after that, captured again, beaten, and eventually protected by the females in the village. This was absolutely disgraceful in their own culture, as to be saved by females, well, that looked bad, but then again, what was the other alternative? The females know that they would not stand a chance in a fight against any warrior class, but they also know that a warrior could face the worst punishments if they simply attacked a female straight up. The females tried to administer some level of first aid, but they were having the toughest time as they had no actual training for it. Because of this, they ended up trying to get him to Doc, but Doc wasn't faring any better. Inside his clinic, as the wounded were brought in, he did his best, but he is only one snake with only two hands and a tail. Since most of the fighting is done with their bare hands and bladed weapons, it isn't long before the floor is eventually slick with blood from those who are injured coming in. Resembling the old human program that he enjoyed watching, he fell back on what he learned about that, since he wasn't going to be getting any additional help. And with the growing number of wounded flowing in, he fell back onto what he knew as meatball surgery. Doing so, he believed he could save more lives, but it wasn't going to be pretty. That is, until the warriors fighting figured out exactly what that strange piece of cloth meant that was flapping above that particular domicile. As Doc was packing a wound of a warrior with a very large laceration across his torso, he had just grabbed the needle and got ready to do the stitching when he heard shouts from others who were screaming on the way in. None of those were wounded very badly. They weren't in dire need, as most of the wounds seemed to be simple lacerations. The worst one was a laceration of the tail, which seemed to almost be done bleeding. Though it was clear that they were all from the same house, when Doc told them they had to wait, they were not going to listen. They started screaming at him to stop what he was doing and heal them and them only. The doc was only about halfway done closing up the torso of the snake in front of him. However, those that came in just didn't want to wait. They rushed over and flipped the wounded snake off the table. This resulted in the stitches busting open, all the packing material spraying out. The wound immediately opened, blood sprayed across the floor, and the snake screamed out in pain. And he screamed his final scream as his insides began to be exposed to sunlight. As Doc tried to rush to the snake on the floor, the others grabbed him and demanded that they get patched up instead. Enraged, Doctor screamed at them, "Get out of my clinic!" This only prompted one to raise his axe, place it near the doc's neck. "As a healer, you only have to treat us. All others can wait." Shaking, though defiant, Doc stood tall and proud. "Do you know who saved me from death? Humans. Do you know who trained me how to save lives far beyond the capabilities of our own species? Humans. Do you know what I had to pledge, to swear, in order to get training for the humans? I had to promise to save as many lives as possible, regardless of their affiliation. Do you know that humans regard life so much that medics, like me, are not to be targeted in combat? Well, let me inform you right here and now, they have taught me more than enough to know that your wounds are not damaging enough to threaten your life. You are simple routine," motioning over to others. "They are priority. Now get the fuck out of my clinic!" The snake holding the axe thought for a moment. Then, realizing he had just been insulted, raised his hand ready to strike down on the doc's face, yet the doc stood defiance. His hand was immediately caught by his subordinates, trying to calm him down any way they could. Pulling himself free, the large warrior threatened all of them with demotion or other punishments. While he was yelling, a voice cried out. A female voice screamed into the clinic for Doc. She slithered past everyone as they saw what was going on and immediately made a path for her. As they looked, in her grip was the body of a young female. The mother was in hysterics as the doc got to the girl and got her onto the table. An axe was actually sticking out of her lower snake torso, blood soaking down so much that her mother's torso in the front was soaked all the way down. Seeing this, the warriors backed off and Doc got to work. Doc was absolutely cursing up a storm as he worked on the child. The child had passed out, obviously, from the impact and pain. He wished at that point that he had his equipment from Earth. He was forced to remove the axe with very, very little surgical equipment, no anesthetic, and no help. As he began to remove the axe, the child began to wake up. As she did, she began screaming in pain and then began to thrash. As he grabbed her and tried to push her down, he turned towards the warriors. "Hold her down!" They paused for a moment. "I said hold her down!" They moved in without a second thought and then wrapped her up with their own coils, wrapping not only the child but the table itself, trying to hold her in place. With every touch of Doc's hands and tools, the child cried out in pain. The mother was trying desperately to comfort her, while the Doc worked as fast as he possibly could to make sure the wound closed. As he worked, his only fear at that point was that the child would stop screaming. If she lost consciousness, with this much blood loss, she would simply slip into a coma and might not wake up no matter what they do. With everything going on, no one noticed that the noise outside the clinic had completely stopped. Around the same time the warriors had actually made it to the clinic, the ships in orbit saw something arriving, something that made them all stop shooting instantly. As they saw, the Great High Grand Leader's dreadnought had entered the system very close to the planet they were fighting over. This was a dangerous maneuver, as you mess up with one calculation of a gravity well and you're screwed. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part is this was unprecedented, as the dreadnought had not left their own home planet's orbit in nearly 6 decades. The size of the ship, along with its loadout of weapons, made it capable of facing any house military alone. It might not come out on top, but it's definitely going to screw them up. But right now, it wasn't alone. It was flanked by multiple large transport ships. On the ground, the fighting continued until they saw shuttles approaching. The last of the fighting in the village didn't stop until a group of royal guard moved on into the village. As they quelled everything, the smell of barbecue was still in the air, mixed with the smell of fresh blood on the ground. They moved through the village swiftly. The security had full authority for this mission given to them by the great High Grand Leader himself. The secretary could hear the area go silent as he went through, as they realized that if they kept fighting, well, their lives were over whether they won or not. And everything was quiet again until he heard screaming of a young snake. With guards in tow, he tried to find the sound. He went and looked around and saw a strange building with many, many wounded people around. A strange piece of cloth seemed to wave above the portal in front, but he didn't know what it meant. It must be something. Pushing everyone aside, he could hear someone yelling to hold someone down. Thoughts of torture and violation of a young female raced through his mind. Thinking back to his young daughters, this made his blood boil. When he entered, he saw a sight of an axe being pulled out of a child's back and tossed to the side with a loud metallic clang. Not sure what was going on, he watched as a male tended to her wounds with such speed and practiced precision that it almost looked like an act, like a stage act. The sound of the girl crying and the mother's attempt at consoling filled the air. He then noticed the body of the warrior class that was on the floor, with his intestines still sliming out from his torso. The ones holding the girl down noticed the secretary and tried to salute, though the moment they tried to do this, it meant that they had to release their coils over the girl. This made Doc yell back at them, "Hold her down, damn it!" The secretary moved in and was noticed by Doc. He noticed, but he didn't care and just kept going. The secretary was pushed by Doc as he reached for some sort of anesthetic. He poured it onto the wound, and it bubbled slightly. The girl screeched again with the loudest scream you can understand as the antiseptic went to work. Quickly, bubbling down and finishing its burning sensation, he dried the wound and bandaged it. The young girl was told not to move if she wanted to make sure her stitches didn't come out. She was still in pain, but the majority of pain was over. The doc then turned to the warriors and ordered them to very carefully take her back to her domicile. The secretary was absolutely shocked that they did this without hesitation and without question. Doc then yelled, "If you're still bleeding, get up front!" The secretary, finally understanding the situation fully, asked, "Is there anything you require?" Doc looked over and said, "Yeah, send all your medics you have." The secretary looked confused and said, "Medics?" The entire situation had been recorded by hidden cameras placed all around the village. The team that was currently recording this was watching everything live and was more than a little angry at what was going on. Yet their mission was clear. They had to watch. They watched as snakes squabbled over the littlest things and also the littlest information. They had to stop themselves a few times from charging out when they saw Doc threatened, yet they realized they could not leave soon enough to protect him if that was the case anyway. Plus, the intel for the mission was the highest priority, and the mission so far had been a success. The hidden cameras around the village picked up terabytes of information every minute. They knew the analysis folks were about to be handed their version of a wet dream when they got back to Earth. But for right now, they simply have to wait. They sat in their Corvette shuttle, continuing to record. They pick up transmissions to and from the planet, but they don't interfere with any of them. It's clear to see certain houses are being far too concerned with their current standings, whatever the hell that meant. Other houses were just happy to get their families back. Over the course of several weeks, they waited and they watched. They watched as families were sent back to their own houses. Some still squabbled over simple mementos. Those that fought in the village were receiving punishments that were very, variable to say the least. Anything from being chewed out to execution. The humans inside the Corvette actually raised a glass and smiled as they saw Cookie and Doc get on their transports and head home. They knew that both of them were going to where they needed to be because they both were, jovial. Eventually, the entire planet was stripped of personnel and all human goods they could find. The Columbra had left the planet alone as it is within a certain house's territory, and they were not to interfere. This small house, just at the point, didn't have enough resources to colonize, at least at the moment. This is what the humans had waited on. As soon as they verified that all the Columbus ships were outside of this system, with an absolute burst of power, the Corvette began to rise from the river that it had been hiding in. As it rose, it tore apart part of the shore that had covered up its port side. Rising up, they slowly turned towards the sky, and finally, they got a chance to head home themselves. After reaching Earth, the recon team was rewarded with 6 months leave. They needed time to recover. They had spent that long simply waiting for the Columbra to take their people and get the hell off that rock. The general personally walked next to the massive blocks of hard drives to the intel analysts. The analysts knew that this was coming and positively salivated over the chance to research this. The general looked at them and said, "Here's everything. I want reports every month on your progress. You've got a year to give me 100% of everything, complete breakdown, all of it. Though it would be nice if you guys got it done sooner. Hint, hint." The intel folks understood the implication. Things are not going to progress on anyone's timeline, as nobody knows what the hell's going to happen next. That being said, the next offensive operation was not going to happen for another 15 months. Considering offensive operation, that would mean they're taking another section away from the Columbra. The sectors on the opposite side of Sol, away from the Columbra territory, were pretty much constantly being taken at a relatively fast pace. There was no one there to stop them, and they didn't find any life anything above single-celled organisms. With their territory expanding and exploration taking its toll on the human population, humanity maintains its relative peace, as this is the new age of expansion and exploration, so there's plenty of room for everyone. No one's stepping on each other's toes. However, there is one question that simply lingers out in the ether, something that all humans are asking themselves. Do you have any idea what the snakes are going to do now?